Let's now turn to abortion. Mr. DeLuzio, in light of the U.S. Supreme Court's decision to reverse Roe versus Wade, do you believe that the High Court made the right decision? Why or why not?
Thank you for the question. As you can imagine, I hear from people, and women especially in this district, Republicans, Independents, Democrats, who are furious at what the Supreme Court did. I don't agree with the decision to overturn decades of precedent in Roe v. Wade to take away reproductive freedom from people. I'll be fighting in Washington to protect those rights, signing a law, voting for a law that will restore Roe v. Wade under federal law. My opponent is opposed to abortion. He's supported bans nationally. He's done it in writing and questionnaires. He's opposed exceptions for rape and incest. He's campaigned alongside Doug Mastriano, who is threatening to put women and their doctors in prison. This extremism is wildly out of touch and it's dangerous. I have young daughters. I do not want Jeremy Shaffer having a say on their reproductive choices. I don't want Doug Mastriano to have a say either.
Mr. Shaffer?
So look, Chris DeLuzio is being delusional again here. You can pull up debates that I was in 4 years ago, and you can be able to see clearly when I answered the League of Women Voters that I say, yes, I am pro-life, and I favor exceptions for life, rape, and incest. I also was attacked once again in my own Republican primary because I stated that it is not the role of the federal government to decide abortion, but it's the role of the individual states. I've answered that same way on other educational issues. I believe that ultimately the Constitution is very clear that it's up to the states to decide their role on the laws affecting abortion. I believe my opponent's position is the radical one. He supports what the House Democrats tried to do, which was to put into law that you would have taxpayer-funded federal abortion, and that would be available up until the moment of birth. That's a radical position. I believe that we should put it back to the states, which is what our Constitution says.
So Jeremy just lied to all of you. So he's written his answer in questionnaires in this election and his prior one.
You can look at the tape from 4 years ago. You can look at the tape 4 years ago and you can see the answer.
It's my turn to speak. I'd appreciate it if you'd wait your turn. I know it's difficult. He's done it in questionnaires opposing rape and incest victims having access to abortion. He's done it in this election, calling for Congress to restrict abortion. He's called for federal bans. And let's also be clear. He talks about sending to the states. Doug Mastriano is the gubernatorial nominee of his party in Pennsylvania. Doug Mastriano wants to criminalize abortion with no exceptions and put women and doctors in prison.
Mr. Shaffer, can we ask directly, in the past you have talked about Congress having a constitutional amendment to ban abortions with, I guess, the exception for the mother's life. Is that still your position?
So what I said in the Republican debate in the primary was that Congress does not have the power under the U.S. Constitution to make abortion legal or to make it illegal. And that if we wanted to change that in either direction, it would have to be done through a constitutional amendment. You can listen to the exact words. I didn't even actually say what the constitutional amendment would be, but I said that since Congress does not have the power to do that, and since it's reserved to the states, it would have to be done through a constitutional amendment.
So what would that constitutional amendment look like that you would support?
So I'm not openly supporting any constitutional amendment right now. I believe that the right place for it to do would be in the states, and that's where it should be done.
And just to be clear, the person running for governor in his party in this state, in Pennsylvania, is Doug Mastriano, with whom he's campaigned, has an office in Beaver County, who wants to ban abortion without exceptions, wants to threaten prison time for doctors and women. That's the decision he wants to kick to Pennsylvania, right to Doug Mastriano's desk.
So look, my wife is a doctor. I do not believe that doctors should be put into prison for abortion or for other actions. That's just a ridiculous statement. I've made my point very clear. I'm in favor of exceptions for life, rape, and incest, and I believe that that decision should be up to the individual states, whoever the voters of Pennsylvania decide.
Jeremy, you're not being honest about what you've said in questionnaires time and again, including in this election when you've called for congressional action to limit abortion. Just be honest with people.
I don't believe that federal money should be funded for abortion.
Jeremy, I'm still speaking. Again, I know it's hard for you. You should be honest with folks. You've taken this position, you've done it in writing. Now the politics are bad for you and you're lying through your teeth to get elected. Just be honest with people.
All right, thank you. We are going to pause now for a quick break. More of this KDKA debate in the 17th Congressional District right after this. Welcome back to KDKA's debate between the candidates for Pennsylvania's 17th Congressional District. Republican Jeremy Shaffer and Democrat Chris DeLuzio. Next question, Mr. Shaffer, will go to you first. The district that you're seeking to represent is seeing the startup of an operation, a major industrial operation, bringing hundreds of badly needed jobs, but also using fossil fuels from fracking to produce plastic pellets. You both say you want to protect the environment, fight climate change, limit climate change. So would you have supported greenlighting the Shell ethane cracker plant? And if so, how is that consistent with your commitment to protect the environment and reduce climate change?
Absolutely, yes. Look, it is ridiculous that Joe Biden has to go over to Saudi Arabia and fist bump a foreign dictator and beg him to produce more energy. When we in Western Pennsylvania have one of the world's largest energy reserves beneath our feet. We have the Marcellus Shale, even bigger than Saudi Arabia's energy reserves. We can provide tens of thousands of high-paying jobs to workers here in Western Pennsylvania and do it in a way that helps our environment and our economy. I'm an electrical engineer. I can tell you all about the electrical grid. The foundation of our economy is based on affordable, reliable energy. And if we were able to be energy dominant, we could be able to reduce Russia's geopolitical influence. We could be able to power the world. And if the world was using natural gas from Western Pennsylvania, we would actually cut CO2 emissions by over 50%. This is a win-win-win solution. My opponent and his leftist friends that he's supporting with the Green New Deal want to shut it all down.
Time's up. Mr. DeLuzio.
Yeah, absolutely support the investment. I'm proud to be endorsed by the workers whose livelihoods depend on our energy economy, who built the cracker plant, the building trades, from steam fitters to boilermakers, plumbers, you name it. All of those unions who endorse Republicans and Democrats have all endorsed me in this race. They know I'm committed to the union way of life, of course, but to building and protecting those jobs. And we've got to have energy security here. Beyond natural gas, which we are a major source of, we also have a strong nuclear facility in our district, providing reliable power to the grid. I look over to Europe. I see them decarbonizing too fast. I see them walking away from their nuclear sector. I see them reliant on Russian exports of oil and gas, staring down a depression, funding Russia's militarism. It's a mistake. And it's curious for me to hear Mr. Shaffer mention Saudi Arabia, another country that his business has been helping build infrastructure, a country through OPEC who's taking dead aim at Americans' wallets, messing with global oil supply. It's the same kind of corporate sell-off stuff we do not need in Washington.
So Chris DeLuzio is being delusional yet again here. I had a 40-person small business here in Western Pennsylvania. Never did any work in Saudi Arabia. I've never even been to Saudi Arabia. And look, he is directly funding candidates and wants to be part of the House Progressive Caucus that supports the Green New Deal. So he can say all he wants here, but the leftist group that he wants to be part of directly wants to shut down our energy industry in Western Pennsylvania.
So Jeremy lied to you again, folks. He's been an executive at this company for a decade. He sold out his company to them, has stayed on, made millions, has stock. They've been doing business all over the world, coddling our adversaries, like Communist China, like Saudi Arabia. If you think Saudi Arabia is your friend, you're wrong. They're messing with us at OPEC. They're messing with gas prices. They're messing with global oil supply. And his company does business with them. That's the reality.
Okay,
so I think
we're done. We're done. I'm sorry. We're done on this subject because we have a lot more topics to get to. John Shumway, over to you.
You know, in just the past few minutes, gentlemen, we've heard delusional and we've heard liar going back and forth. You know, it wasn't that long ago where there was a spirit of cooperation on Capitol Hill, where despite political differences, the two sides could come together in bipartisanship and actually get things done. The electorate is totally frustrated with what they see coming out of Washington, the inability of the two sides to sit down and talk. So, Mr. DeLuzio, we'll start with you. What would you do on Capitol Hill to cross that aisle, to be able to work with people on the other side, especially if your party leadership is saying,
I love the question, John, and very much appreciate it. I come into politics. I've not run 4 times. I come into this from public service. I come to this from someone who wore the uniform and led Americans in Iraq and at sea. I understand what it is to put this country first, to put this region first. I've committed. I'll join the 4-country caucus made up of Democrats and Republicans who've worn the uniform, who've served, who work across the aisle and meet with frequency and pass bills. And they've had great success on things from Veterans Affairs to defense measures and so much more. It is important that we can find places to work together. I wish there were more of them. The Bipartisan Infrastructure Package is one, the CHIPS Act, the Gun Reform Package, the PACT Act. Many of these bills with overwhelming Democratic support, at best we get 5, 10 Republicans supporting them. These are popular measures. People expect us to work together. I come to this from public service as someone who always puts this country first, and I'll do it in Washington every day.
Mr. Shaffer, your view on this?
Look, as an engineer, I look at the root cause of what's going on in D.C. Our system is broken. I'm 45 years old. There have been people in both parties that have been serving in Congress for longer than I've been alive. I'm a big believer in term limits. We need term limits to make sure that people come back and listen to their constituents and go on with their life. We need campaign finance reform to take the big money out of politics. We need to end egregious gerrymandering that's pushing the extremes on both sides. I've been a commissioner elected by Republicans and Democrats. I've won Democratic primaries before. What Chris DeLuzio doesn't tell you is that he voted against his own party's platform because he didn't think it was leftist enough. He was a delegate for Bernie Sanders. He has aligned himself with the most left-wing part of his party, and he said it's his mission to try to pull Joe Biden to the left. I think we need a middle-out approach to government. I'm looking forward to be part of the Problem Solvers Caucus, which is a bipartisan group of Republicans and Democrats dedicated to solving the big problems in D.C.
30 seconds, Mr. DeLuzio.
Sure. If Jeremy's worried about extremism, the first thing he could do is stop campaigning with people who tried to overthrow our election. Stop having Kevin McCarthy come to Western Pennsylvania. Refuse the money and support from the insurrectionists who've given you money and endorsed you. You won't find a single insurrectionist supporting you because I wouldn't welcome their support. I risked my life for this country, as lots of Americans did, as lots of folks in Western Pennsylvania have done, and we don't need people who are willing to provide comfort to those who would tear down our government serving in Congress.
Last word on this, Mr. Shaffer.
Look, we desperately need to come together as a country. We are tearing ourselves apart while China and Russia can just sit on the sidelines and watch this going on. I have a proven track record of working with Republicans and Democrats in local government and getting things done. In Ross Township, we work together to improve our local community, to improve our roads, to improve our bridges, to make our police strong, to keep it safe, and even to cut some taxes while prioritizing our needs. This isn't rocket science. We can get it done, and I will get it done in D.C.
Thank you. Lisa?
Gentlemen, our next question is on voting laws. Communities of color tend to be negatively impacted by restrictive voting laws. The Pennsylvania Supreme Court is expected to rule on whether or not county election officials should count a mail-in ballot that is received on time, but without a written date on the return envelopes. What is your position? Should these ballots in undated returned envelopes be counted as long as they are received by election day? Mr. Shaffer.
Yeah. Look, well, I think you've mentioned some critical parts of law. Election law is really handled by the individual states. And so you mentioned the Pennsylvania State Supreme Court, the Pennsylvania Legislature, the Pennsylvania Governor, all those positions that I am not running for. I do believe that we should have elections that are fair and free. We should have security around them. We should make sure that every vote that's legally cast should be counted. I personally am fine that if a vote is received before the election day, that vote should count.
All right. Mr. DeLuzio.
I think if folks return their ballot by the time prescribed in the law and it's received, it ought to count. We have a protection in this country and a presumption that when your ballot is cast fairly, correctly, and you're eligible, we count the vote. And the first part of your question talks about barriers to voting for folks. You know, I'm someone who's worked as a lawyer to protect voting rights. We were doing this work in a bipartisan fashion for years. The Voting Rights Act used to be passed with huge majorities in the Congress. President George W. Bush signed a reauthorization. This has somehow become a partisan football for one reason. Republicans won't support it. They won't vote for the reauthorization, the John Lewis Voting Rights Advancement Act, to bring back the same protections essentially that we had since the 1960s to protect folks' voting rights, especially in communities of color. This is not a partisan problem, it's an American one, and I wish the Republicans would get back on board to doing what's right to protect voting rights.
Mr. Shaffer, 30 seconds.
Yeah, I'm 110% in favor. Look, we need to make sure that everyone has access to voting. I've said that in the past. I've worked as a Ross Township Commissioner to make our voting places as accessible and open as possible on Election Day. No one should be disenfranchised. I would work with Republicans and Democrats to make sure that we have a free, fair election with security to make sure that there's no shenanigans that happen.
30 seconds, Mr. DeLuzio.
Mr. Shaffer really didn't answer the question, and frankly, this is someone who's been campaigning with election deniers, who has a campaign office with Doug Mastriano in Beaver County, who's brought election deniers like Kevin McCarthy to this district. These are the people who are undermining elections, undermining our faith in democracy, who tried to overthrow our government on January 6th. That's the reality. And you can say all the words you want about being bipartisan. The most bipartisan thing in the world is to be committed to this government and to not provide comfort and campaign alongside those who would tear it down.
Thank you.
All right, time now for one more quick break. We'll be right back. All right, continuing now with KDKA's debate between the candidates for U.S. House in Pennsylvania's 17th District. Next question, Mr. DeLuzio, begins with you. What have we learned about how to handle the next public health crisis from the COVID pandemic and the government response to it? The painful business shutdowns and school closings, but also more than 1 million COVID deaths in the U.S. alone.
A horrific death toll, not just in this country, but across the globe, and certainly a cost that we've all paid who survived it, right? In the shutdowns to our life and seeing kids fall behind at school. I think one of the most important lessons is that we have to be investing now to be ready for the next public health crisis so that we have the tools to combat it, so we can invest in the technology for vaccines and the rest. But also we need leaders who are willing to prioritize keeping our kids in schools, keeping everyday life going while keeping us safe. It's not a small thing in the next crisis I hope we never experience, but it'll be a different kind of pathogen, I'm sure. We won't have the answers, but we have to be thinking constantly about how we can do best to keep people safe, keep our kids learning and moving forward, and keep people thriving in a place that might not be so safe if we have another thing like a COVID pandemic.
Mr. Shaffer.
Yeah, government in so many areas is far too reactive and not proactive. We need to be prepared. We need to have the research, we need to have the supplies, the PPE supplies, so that we're able to handle it, whatever that challenge may come. My wife's a medical doctor. You know, I've seen firsthand how this has stressed out our medical community, how it's pushed us to the limits. We need to invest in our medical infrastructure. We need to invest in our healthcare infrastructure. And we also need to defend our freedoms. You know, we went through this terrible pandemic, and many issues arose, with kids being put behind in schools, with people being forced to potentially get a vaccine or not against their will. Those are issues that we should be working out now so that we're not trying to decide that on the fly. When I was a township commissioner, we developed long-term plans for Ross Township. It wasn't in the area of pandemics, but it was in the area of what type of infrastructure do we need to replace? How do we plan ahead toward the future? We need to come together as a country, Republicans and Democrats, and say, what type of country do we want to be, and how do we prepare for that?
Mr. DeLuzio, just a quick follow-up on this. Did the government go too far? Not that the pandemic is over, but from the response that we've seen over the past couple of years, did the government response go too far in limiting personal freedom?
Look, I think the biggest mistake that I saw was we had kids being told they couldn't go to school, but bars were open. There were decisions that didn't make the right priorities. And frankly, knowing what we know now about what COVID was, how it was spread, we could have been creative in finding ways to keep kids in school at big outside tents, finding places in public parks or fields. We could have been creative in keeping our kids learning and keeping them safe in the pandemic. That's a lesson we have to have learned. And I know the pathogen may be different in a future pandemic, but we've got to prioritize protecting our most vulnerable and certainly making sure children don't fall behind.
Mr. Shaffer, 30 seconds.
Yes, the government went too far. It encroached on personal freedoms of individuals. The government really needs to respect the personal freedom and shouldn't have been forcing people to get vaccines. That's a choice that I made on my own, and that was my choice. But the government should not have made people choose between their job or getting a shot.
Thank you. John Shumway, next question.
Mr. Shaffer, the U.S. Supreme Court has rarely been so unpopular. In the year 2000, we're talking about 29% of the people who actually said they disapproved of how the High Court was operating. And that number has now gone to 55%. Some people say there should be more justices. Some people say there should be term limits. Some people say we should have a retirement age. Is reform necessary on the Supreme Court, and what would you do?
Yeah. You know, we live in such a divisive age right now, such that the approval rating for a lot of our government institutions is at all-time lows. There is one institution that even has a lower approval rating than the Supreme Court, and that is the U.S. Congress. Sadly, I think some of the latest polls only 15 to 20% of people approve of the job that Congress is doing. But I am a big believer in term limits. I'm a big believer in term limits for Congress. Here in the state of Pennsylvania, we do have age mandated retirements for our state Supreme Court justices. I do believe that that is something that we should look at. I would be in favor of having a similar thing. Look, whether you're a Democrat or Republican, it's not good to have people who might be 90 years old who are getting to the point where they could have dementia or senility. Not to say that all older people have that, but there are people who are serving right now in Congress and that have shown signs of dementia. And that's something that should not be allowed. So I would be in favor of looking at doing an age limit. And that's not targeted at one party or another. That's just targeted at good government.
Mr. DeLuzio, your thoughts on this?
Look, I think I'm not surprised that we see poll after poll of waning confidence in the Supreme Court, of people not having that respect for the institution, not trusting them. They've undid decades of precedent in attacking Roe v. Wade and attacking reproductive freedom. They've been attacking workers' rights for a long time. So people are fed up, and frankly, we feel powerless. From the Citizens United decision that said unlimited corporate money can come flow through our politics, whether it's buying commercials or funding people on the ground, whatever the case may be. People have lost confidence and are continuing to lose confidence. I'm open to reform. I don't know what it'll look like. I think the idea of this life tenure for an unelected body that is dictating decisions around our daily lives, from reproductive freedom to gun safety and weighing in on all kinds of disputes, it's a problem. And it's a problem in the background of waning and dropping public faith in our courts. I say this as someone who's clerked for a Republican judge, where respect for the rule of law was paramount. We have to have that for our rule of law to succeed and for our government to succeed.
Mr. Shaffer, another 30 seconds.
Yeah, we need to make sure leaders in both parties need to be able to work together. Because in a democracy, the democracy will only function when people have trust in the system. We will get ourselves in a dangerous place when we are so divisive that one party or another, whether it's the Democrats or the Republicans or the middle, loses trust in the system. We need leaders who will step up and work together, whether it's in the courts, whether it's in the legislature or the executive branch, to restore trust in our government and to move this country forward. And we can do that together.
Thank you. Lisa?
Our next topic is immigration, and the question will go first to Mr. DeLuzio. In recent weeks, we have seen migrants coming to this country, being placed on buses and planes and transported unannounced to cities like New York City and Martha's Vineyard. Do you agree with this practice, and what immigration policies would you introduce in Congress to help strengthen our borders, but also be respectful and humanely treat migrants arriving in the United States?
Thank you. I don't agree with the practice. It's political gamesmanship at the expense of really vulnerable people. The border ought to be secure. This administration and the last should have done a better job of getting that process more orderly for folks, having more security. I come to this as someone who has served and worn the uniform, understands what it is to care and prioritize safety and order. We have to do better. We need a better system for processing folks fleeing violence from places like Ukraine, seeking asylum, to be vetted, to make sure they can be here safely. And we need a process for folks who have been living in this country, paying their taxes, raising their families, following the rules, perhaps brought here as young children, to have some path to normalized status. I think there's bipartisan will and interest in doing exactly that. I think we can find Republicans and Democrats to get together to fix our immigration system, but it's not working. And it's got to be more secure, more orderly, and some way to provide a permanent status for folks.
Mr. Shaffer?
Look, the southern border is out of control. We just set a new record for the number of illegal people crossing the border. We need a multi-pronged approach. We need both parties to work together to solve this. It used to be that Republicans and Democrats agreed that we needed a border barrier, a wall, or some sort of blockade. Now, because of pressure from the far left, most Democrats have gotten scared and they don't support funding for a border wall. The people that my opponent, Chris DeLuzio, supports, AOC, Bernie Sanders, they're the reason this is going on. They want an open border, and that's what we are getting right now. We need a border wall. We also need checks at our employers to make sure that they actually enforce the rules that say you have to be an American citizen to get a job. And we need to solve this. Right now, Western Pennsylvania is suffering. This country is suffering. 300 people die every day due to drug overdoses. Most of those drugs are coming across, like fentanyl, across our open border. That's the equivalent of 2 737s crashing every day in this country. We need to get to the border secure and solve the problem.
Mr. Shaffer, very quickly, did you agree with that practice of
I think we need to, we need to get to the root cause. We need to prevent people from coming over. Unfortunately, there's a lot of political games on both sides going on. I do think it's kind of silly to take people, put them on a plane or a bus and send them somewhere, but it's also a cry of desperation that some of these border communities have to try to bring awareness to it. But I would not personally do that, no.
Okay, very quickly, Mr. DeLuzio.
So what's the question?
Just your rebuttal.
Oh, well, look, I think it is gamesmanship to throw people all over the country fleeing something coming across our border. We need more security and order at the border. And look, I don't need a lecture about what it is to care about public safety, to exhibit physical courage. I know what that's about from my time in uniform, and it's part of how we have to approach public safety in general, and certainly at our southern border.
Quick rebuttal, Mr.
No, look, a nation cannot exist if it cannot defend its borders. I don't even know why we have to have a debate about this in Congress. We need to secure our borders, and we need to revamp our immigration system into an immigration system that works for this country. When I was at Carnegie Mellon, I was there. I was a minority in my own department as an American citizen. There were people from all over the world that came to Carnegie Mellon, and a lot of them wanted to stay here and create jobs here. And we need to provide an immigration system that allows people that add value to this country to be able to be here and is based on a merit system.
And that's our time. Thank you.
Okay, time now for our candidates' closing statements. The order was determined earlier by coin toss. Mr. Shaffer, you go first, and you have 90 seconds.
Sure. Thank you so much for having me here today. It's been an honor to be able to run for office here in Allegheny and Beaver County. Our country faces serious problems. We have a national debt that has just eclipsed $31 trillion. We have inflation that's approaching double digits, and it's forcing families to make tough choices between gas and groceries. And as winter approaches, people are acutely aware of the high energy prices that we need to heat our homes. Crime is rising in our communities, and it does not have to be this way. I have a proven record. I'm an engineer. I'm a bipartisan problem solver. I've won both primaries in the Democrat and Republican Party. I've served as president of Ross Township and the 33,000 people of that community. I've helped make our libraries better, our roads better. I was elected by a bipartisan majority there. We need people who will go to Congress, who will put partisanship aside, who will put the country over their party. That's something that I promise you that I will do. I will come home from Washington, D.C. I will look my 5 kids in the eye, and I will always say that I put the interests of our region and our country first. I've stood up to my own party before. I have no hesitation in doing it. I was born in the greatest country in the history of the world, and I've been blessed to live the American dream. I've risen from being born to teenage parents, to having to work hard my whole life, to being a success, to creating jobs, every single one of them right here in Western Pennsylvania. I'll fight for you, I'll fight for our region, and I'll fight for this country, and I ask for your vote on November 8th.
Thank you. Mr. DeLuzio, you now have 90 seconds.
Ken, thank you for a great debate, and Jeremy for sharing the stage with me. Now look, the values I learned growing up right here in Western Pennsylvania are the same ones my wife and I are teaching my young kids that drove me to devote my life to service, leading Americans in uniform in Iraq and at sea, fighting for our rights, what I'll do every day in Washington. And look, my opponent, he's made a fortune from a corporation building infrastructure in China. He wants to ban abortion, has been lying about it. He's not going to work for us. He'll work for right-wing extremists like Doug Mastriano, MAGA Republicans who've been bankrolling him and supporting him in this race. He's not going to stand up to the corporations who've been gouging us, shipping our jobs overseas. I believe in something very different. We gotta be fighting to bring down costs, to make stuff right here again, to have strong union jobs, to stand up to our economic foes in China, not coddling them. I'm proud to be the union-backed candidate, to be the guy standing on this stage, standing up for workers, not big corporations. We've got to protect our rights, women's freedom to make their own choices, and our democracy and the Constitution that I swore an oath to defend after 9/11. These are the Western PA values I learned. They drive me. They're why I'm running and asking to represent you, because I believe deeply in this country and was willing to risk my life for all of us. So I hope you'll vote for me, and know this, when I'm your congressman, I'll always put you, your families, and this country first. Thank you.
Gentlemen, thank you. On behalf of all of us at KDKA-TV, thanks so much to the candidates, and thank you for joining us for this debate. And thanks again to our political editor, John Delano, who's under the weather. John, speedy recovery. I'm Ken Rice. Thanks again for watching. We'll see you on the news.